The morning sun streamed through the large windows of Atlanta International Airport as a small figure in bright yellow sneakers skipped along the crowded terminal. Little Priya, just 7 years old, held onto her stuffed giraffe named Spots while her mother Ritu walked beside her, pulling their red carry-on suitcase. The excitement of flying made Priya's dark eyes sparkle with joy. This was only her second time on an airplane. "Look, Mama, that plane looks just like a big silver bird." Priya pointed at a Southwest Airlines aircraft through the window, bouncing on her toes. Her two butterfly hair clips caught the sunlight, sending tiny rainbow reflections dancing on the wall. As they waited in line to board Flight 2847 to Chicago, Priya practiced reading the signs around her, something she'd been working on in first grade. Her mother smiled proudly, adjusting Priya's backpack straps. They were heading to visit Priya's grandmother, who had promised to teach her how to make her famous sweet coconut ladoos. Flight attendant Min Ji Chen stood at the gate, greeting passengers with a warm smile. She had been flying with Southwest for 12 years, and something about Priya's enthusiasm reminded her of her own daughter back home. When Priya reached the front of the line, she gave Minji a tiny wave. "Well, hello there. That's quite a magnificent giraffe you've got," Minji said, bending down slightly to meet Priya's eyes. "This is Spots. He's never been on an airplane before," Priya replied, holding up her well-loved stuffed animal. "I told him it's okay to be nervous because I'll hold his hand the whole time." Minji chuckled. "That's very thoughtful of you. I'm sure Spots will have a wonderful flight with such a caring friend." As they made their way down the jet bridge, Priya held tightly to her mother's hand, counting the steps just like they practiced. The inside of the plane felt like a new adventure waiting to happen. They found their seats in row 14. Priya got the window seat, just as her mother had promised. While other passengers settled in around them, Priya arranged Spots carefully in the middle seat between herself and her mother. She pulled out her favorite coloring book and a pack of crayons from her backpack, setting them neatly in the seat pocket in front of her. "Remember what we talked about?" Ritu gently reminded her daughter. "Inside voice on the plane, and if you need anything. Ask you or the flight attendant," Priya finished, nodding seriously. She was determined to be the best passenger on the plane. The familiar sound of the beverage cart caught Priya's attention as Minji made her way down the aisle, helping passengers get comfortable before takeoff. When she passed their row, she gave Priya and Spots a special wink. As the plane began to push back from the gate, Priya pressed her face against the window, watching the ground crew in their bright yellow vests wave goodbye. The engines hummed to life, and she felt a flutter of excitement in her stomach. She had no idea that this ordinary flight was about to become something quite extraordinary, all because of something she would notice in the hours ahead. "Mama, look. The buildings are getting smaller," Priya whispered in amazement as they took off, the city shrinking beneath them. Her mother squeezed her hand, both of them sharing this peaceful moment as the plane climbed higher into the bright morning sky. Little did anyone know that Priya's keen eyes and innocent honesty would soon play a crucial role in events that would make this flight unforgettable for everyone on board. An hour into the flight, Priya had finished coloring 3 pages in her book, including a magnificent rainbow elephant that she couldn't wait to show her grandmother. Her mother Ritu had dozed off beside her, the gentle hum of the engines making her eyelids heavy after their early morning rush to the airport. Priya looked around the cabin, playing a quiet game she'd made up called Sky Detective. She liked watching people and imagining their stories, just like her teacher had taught them about character observation in their creative writing class. That's when she first noticed him, the man in the blue button-up shirt sitting 3 rows ahead. Something about him seemed different from the other passengers. While most people were reading, sleeping, or watching movies on their tablets, this man kept fidgeting in his seat. His fingers drummed nervously on his armrest, creating a soft tapping sound that reminded Priya of raindrops on her bedroom window. "Please ensure all electronic devices are in airplane mode," Minji's voice came over the intercom, doing a routine reminder. Priya watched as the man quickly shoved his phone into his pocket, only to pull it out again moments later. She counted. He checked his phone 6 times in just a few minutes. The drink cart came by again, and when Minji offered him a beverage, Priya noticed his hands shaking so much that some of his water spilled onto his tray table. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," he kept mumbling, using napkins to wipe up the drops. His voice sounded scared, like her friend at school when she had to give a presentation in front of the class. Priya hugged Spots closer, whispering in his ear, "That man seems really worried about something." She remembered how her mother always said that if you see something that doesn't feel right, you should tell a grown-up you trust. The man stood up suddenly, reaching for the overhead compartment, but then sat back down without opening it. A few minutes later, he did the same thing again. Priya noticed he was wearing 2 different colored socks, one navy and one black. Her mother always said that rushing to pack could make you forget simple things. Through the gaps between the seats, Priya could see him rubbing his face with his hands over and over. He reminded her of how her cousin acted when he was keeping a big secret and felt guilty about it. The man's leg bounced up and down so fast that the seat in front of him slightly shook. A baby started crying somewhere in the back of the plane, and the man jumped in his seat, looking around frantically. Other passengers were starting to give him curious glances, but most were too absorbed in their own activities to really notice his strange behavior. Priya remembered the safety talk before takeoff, where Minji had said they were all one big airplane family for this journey. If someone in your family was upset, you were supposed to help them, right? But how could a little girl help a grown-up who seemed so scared? That's when she got an idea. She still had her purple crayon and plenty of blank pages in her coloring book. Her teacher always said that writing down your thoughts was a good way to solve problems. With careful concentration, Priya began to write a note, her tongue sticking out slightly as she focused on making her letters neat and clear. The man checked his phone again, his face growing paler. He kept looking at his watch, then at the overhead compartment, then back at his phone. Priya knew she had to do something. She looked at her sleeping mother, then at Minji, who was helping another passenger a few rows back. As she finished writing her note, Priya gave Spots an extra squeeze for courage. Sometimes being brave means telling others when something doesn't seem right, she whispered to her stuffed friend, remembering what her school counselor had taught them during safety week. Little did Priya know that her simple act of writing this note would set in motion a chain of events that would affect everyone on Flight 2847, and that her careful observations would turn out to be more important than anyone could have imagined. Priya sat in her window seat, clutching her purple crayon and a torn page from her coloring book. Her heart was beating faster than usual as she carefully folded the note she had just written. The paper crinkled softly under her small fingers as she creased it one more time, making sure it was neat and tidy. Through the small gap between the seats, she could still see the nervous man in the blue shirt. He had started whispering to himself now, words too quiet for anyone to hear, while staring at something inside his carry-on bag that he pulled slightly out from under the seat. The afternoon sun streamed through the airplane windows, casting long shadows down the aisle. Minji pushed the drink cart forward, stopping every few rows to offer beverages and snacks to passengers. The gentle clink of ice cubes in plastic cups and the rustle of snack bags created a familiar airplane symphony. Priya looked at her sleeping mother beside her. Ritu's head had tilted to one side, and her reading glasses were slightly askew on her nose. Should she wake her mom up? But what if she was wrong about the man, and her mother got upset about being disturbed? Priya remembered the time she thought she saw a fox in their backyard, but it turned out to be their neighbor's ginger cat. The drink cart was getting closer. Priya's palms felt sweaty as she held her note tighter. She had written it as carefully as she could, even though some letters were a bit wobbly. The man in the blue shirt keeps looking at something in his bag. He looks really scared and keeps saying sorry to himself. I think maybe he needs help. Min-jae reached their row, her warm smile brightening her face. Would you like some apple juice? She whispered, noticing Ritu was asleep. The same kind smile that had greeted them at the gate now gave Priya the courage she needed. Priya nodded yes to the juice, but then reached out with her other hand, the one holding the folded note. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tugged gently at Min-jae's sleeve. The flight attendant leaned down, and Priya pressed the paper into her hand, putting her finger to her lips in a shut gesture she'd learned in library class. Min-jae's eyebrows lifted slightly as she accepted the note, smoothly slipping it into her pocket while pouring Priya's apple juice. She gave Priya a slight nod, showing she understood this was their secret. As she handed over the juice, Min-jae's eyes held a gentle seriousness that made Priya feel like she'd done the right thing. Spots the giraffe sat faithfully in Priya's lap as she sipped her juice, watching Min-jae continue down the aisle. The flight attendant stopped at the man's row, and Priya noticed how she looked at him a bit longer than usual while asking if he needed anything. He shook his head no without looking up, his legs still bouncing nervously. A few minutes later, Min-jae walked back toward the front of the plane, moving differently now, her steps more purposeful. She stopped to chat with another flight attendant, their heads close together as they whispered. Priya couldn't hear what they were saying, but she saw them glance briefly in the direction of the nervous man. The plane hit a small patch of turbulence, causing the overhead bins to rattle slightly. The man in the blue shirt gripped his armrests so tight his knuckles turned white. He looked at his phone again, even though the fasten seatbelt sign had just lit up. Priya hugged Spots closer, wondering if she should have written more in her note. Maybe she should have mentioned the different colored socks, or how many times he checked his phone. But something in her heart told her she had done enough. Her teacher always said sometimes the smallest actions could make the biggest difference. As the plane continued its journey through the afternoon sky, Priya couldn't know that her simple note was already setting things in motion, like the first domino in a long line. She just knew that when something didn't feel right, it was better to say something than to stay quiet, even if it made your stomach feel like it was full of butterflies. Min-jae had been a flight attendant for 12 years, and something about that folded note from the little girl made her skin tingle with the same instinct that had helped her handle countless mid-air situations. She walked calmly to the galley area, pulling out the carefully folded paper and smoothing it open. Reading the child's wobbly handwriting, Min-jae felt a flutter of concern in her stomach. She'd noticed the passenger in the blue shirt during boarding. Something about his behavior had caught her attention even then, but she dismissed it as regular flight anxiety. Now, looking back through the lens of Priya's observation, all those little details started to add up. Min-jae went through her mental checklist, just like she practiced in countless training sessions. Stay calm. Observe. Report. Act. She glanced down the aisle, watching as the man in question reached for the overhead compartment for the 4th time, only to pull his hand back again. "My," Min-jae whispered to her lead flight attendant, keeping her voice steady and low. "Could you take a look at something?" She shared the note, then added her own observations about the passenger's erratic behavior, his repeated checking of his phone despite announcements, and the visible tremors in his hands. Mai read the note twice, her experienced eyes narrowing slightly. "How old is the girl who wrote this?" she asked quietly. 7 or 8, I'd guess. She's in 14A with her mother. I've been watching her notice things that most adults missed, Min-jae replied, remembering Priya's serious little face as she handed over the note. Following protocol, Mi made her way to the front of the plane to alert the flight deck. Meanwhile, Min-jae did another drink service pass, paying special attention to row 11. The man's behavior was becoming more concerning. His shirt was damp with sweat despite the cool cabin air, and he kept mumbling under his breath. Through the corner of her eye, Min-jae noticed 2 passengers in business attire shift slightly in their seats. She recognized them immediately. Air marshals often had a certain way of carrying themselves. They'd clearly been notified through proper channels and were now carefully monitoring the situation. Back in the galley, May returned with instructions from the captain. We're going to do a status check of all sections. Keep it casual, but note everything. Captain wants a full picture before making any decisions. Her voice was professional, but Minji could hear the underlying tension. Minji walked slowly past Priya's row again, giving the little girl a reassuring smile. Priya was drawing now, but Minji noticed how her eyes kept darting toward the man in the blue shirt. Even while trying to act normal, this observant child couldn't help but keep watch. The next 30 minutes felt like a careful dance. The flight attendants maintained their routine service with practiced smiles. But every movement was purposeful, every observation noted. They watched as the man's agitation seemed to grow. His leg bounced constantly now, and he had started checking his watch every few minutes. Through it all, the other passengers remained blissfully unaware of the silent alert system in motion around them. A baby slept peacefully in row 23. A teenager by the wing watched a movie on his tablet. An elderly couple shared a crossword puzzle near the front. Minji found herself grateful for Priya's note with each passing minute. Sometimes the smallest passengers could be the most observant, seeing things through uncomplicated eyes. The child's simple act of speaking up had given them precious time to assess and monitor the situation properly. Captain Patel's voice crackled through the intercom in the galley. Crew, prepare for update. Minji picked up the phone, her heart beating steadily as she listened to the decision that would affect everyone on board Flight 2847. Whatever was about to happen, they were prepared, all thanks to a little girl's purple crayon and careful observations. The afternoon light had started to fade outside the airplane windows as tension quietly built inside the cabin. The man in the blue shirt was now visibly sweating, dark patches spreading across his back. His behavior was becoming harder for other passengers to ignore, especially when he made his fifth attempt to access the overhead compartment. A kind-looking grandmother sitting across the aisle from him offered him a tissue. "Are you feeling all right, dear? Flying can be quite stressful." He barely managed to nod, his hands shaking as he accepted the tissue. Drops of sweat rolled down his forehead, despite the cool air flowing from the vents above. 2 rows behind him, a businessman in a crisp suit, one of the air marshals, adjusted his position slightly, maintaining a careful watch while appearing to read a magazine. His partner, pretending to nap in an aisle seat nearby, kept one eye barely open, monitoring every movement. Priya had finally dozed off against her mother's shoulder, her purple crayon still clutched in her small hand. Ritu had woken up briefly to check on her daughter, but soon drifted back to sleep, unaware of the silent drama unfolding around them. Spots the giraffe sat watchfully in Priya's lap, his buttoned eyes facing the nervous man's seat. Minji made another pass through the cabin, noting how the man's carry-on bag was now partially unzipped. Through the opening, she glimpsed something that made her pulse quicken, though her face remained perfectly calm. She caught Mia's eye and gave a subtle nod, their coded signal that something needed immediate attention. The man's phone buzzed quietly, making him jump. Despite the fasten seatbelt sign being illuminated, he stood up abruptly, bumping his head on the overhead bin. I need to," he stammered, but couldn't seem to finish his sentence. His different colored socks were now visible to everyone as he shifted from foot to foot in the aisle. A young couple returning from their honeymoon exchanged worried glances. The bride whispered something to her new husband, who patted her hand reassuringly. Other passengers were beginning to notice the strange atmosphere, like the feeling in the air just before a storm. "Sir," Minjit approached him with gentle authority, "I need you to return to your seat. We're experiencing some light turbulence." Her voice was firm but kind, the same tone she used to comfort nervous children during takeoff. The man sank back into his seat, his breathing rapid and shallow. He pressed his face against the window, mumbling what sounded like I can't, over and over. His fingers drummed an erratic pattern on his armrest, creating a nervous rhythm that seemed to echo through the cabin. In the cockpit, Captain Patel and his co-pilot were in deep discussion with air traffic control, their voices low and professional. Years of training had prepared them for situations like this, though each one was unique. Their primary concern remained the safety of every soul on board, from the elderly grandmother offering tissues to little Priya sleeping peacefully with her stuffed giraffe. The air marshals maintained their casual poses while exchanging subtle signals. They had dealt with numerous mid-air situations before, but something about this one felt different. The man showed signs of extreme distress rather than aggression, making them adjust their usual approach. Min Jin noticed the man checking his watch again, the 15th time in the past hour. His other hand kept reaching toward his partially unzipped bag, then pulling back as if it might bite him. Whatever was causing his distress seemed to be getting worse with each passing minute. The plane hit another patch of turbulence, causing the overhead bins to rattle softly. Several passengers grabbed their armrests instinctively, but the man in the blue shirt reacted as if he'd been shocked, nearly jumping out of his seat. His eyes were wide with what looked like pure panic now, darting between his bag, his watch, and the window. As the sun continued its descent outside, casting long shadows through the cabin, everyone could sense that something was about to change. They just didn't know what that change would be, or how a sleeping 7-year-old's purple crayoned note had set it all in motion. Captain Patel's calm voice came through the cabin speakers, cutting through the quiet tension. Ladies and gentlemen, due to a minor mechanical issue, we'll be making an unscheduled landing at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Our flight attendants will prepare the cabin for landing. The man in the blue shirt's head snapped up at the announcement. His face, already pale, now turned almost chalk white. He grabbed his phone again, fingers trembling as he tried to type something, even though the device was in airplane mode. Priya woke up from her nap, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Are we at Grandma's house yet?" she asked, her voice still drowsy. Ritu smiled and smoothed her daughter's hair. "Not yet, sweetie. We're making a quick stop first." Around them, other passengers were quietly discussing the unexpected landing. Minji and Mai moved efficiently through the cabin, checking seatbelts and ensuring all bags were properly stowed. When they reached the nervous man's row, he was hunched over, clutching his carry-on bag to his chest like a shield. "Sir, I'll need to stow that bag under the seat in front of you," Minji said gently. The man's grip tightened on the bag, his knuckles turning white. "I can't. Please. I need to keep it with me," he whispered, his voice cracking. The air marshals tensed slightly, ready to move if needed, but maintaining their casual appearances. The businessman marshal turned a page in his magazine, while his partner shifted in her seat as if just getting comfortable. Sunlight glinted off the plane's wing as it began its descent, casting moving shadows across the cabin. Some passengers were looking out their windows, trying to spot Charlotte's skyline. Others were checking their phones, probably texting family members about the delay. A flight attendant from first class brought a cup of water to the man without him asking. "Small sips might help," she suggested kindly. He took the cup, but his hand shook so badly that water splashed onto his blue shirt, creating dark spots that mixed with his sweat stains. Priya hugged Spots tightly, watching everything with wide eyes. She tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mama, I did something when you were sleeping." Ritu looked down at her daughter curiously, but before Priya could explain, the plane banked into a turn. The captain's voice came through again. "Flight attendants, prepare for arrival in 10 minutes." The announcement seemed to push the man in the blue shirt over an edge. He started rocking back and forth in his seat, still clutching his bag. I can't land, he muttered, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The time isn't right. Nothing's right. His different colored socks tapped an anxious rhythm on the floor. An elderly man in the row behind him leaned forward. "Son, whatever it is, it's going to be okay," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of decades of wisdom. The nervous man just shook his head, tears now visible in his eyes. Through the windows, clouds parted to reveal the approaching airport. The plane's shadow raced across patches of green and concrete below. Flight 2847's unscheduled landing was about to become reality, and no one except the crew knew it had all started with a little girl's purple crayoned note. Minjid passed by Priya's seat one last time, giving her a subtle wink. Priya smiled back, still not fully understanding how her small act of speaking up had changed the course of this flight. She just knew that something important was happening, and somehow she had helped. The landing gear lowered with a gentle thud that vibrated through the cabin. As they descended through the afternoon sky, every passenger could feel that this wasn't just a regular mechanical issue stop. Something else was waiting for them on the ground, and in just a few minutes, they would all find out what it was. The plane touched down smoothly on Charlotte's runway, sunlight glinting off its wings as it slowed. Inside the cabin, the man in the blue shirt was breathing so rapidly that the kind grandmother across the aisle worried he might faint. His carry-on bag remained clutched tightly to his chest, his fingers white from gripping the straps. As they taxied to their gate, Captain Patel's voice came over the speakers once again. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we come to a complete stop and the seatbelt sign is turned off." The words were standard, but his tone carried an extra note of authority. Priya pressed her face against the window, watching the ground crew in their bright yellow vests directing the plane. "Mama, look at all the blinking lights," she exclaimed, pointing at the runway markers. Ritu smiled at her daughter's excitement, unaware of how her little girl's observation skills had affected their journey. The plane came to a stop, but the seatbelt sign stayed on. Through the windows, passengers could see several vehicles approaching the aircraft, more than usual for a simple mechanical issue. 2 police cars, their lights flashing silently, pulled up alongside the plane. The man in the blue shirt saw them too. His face crumpled as tears started rolling down his cheeks. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though no one was sure who he was talking to. "I didn't know what else to do. I just wanted to help my sister." The air marshal who had been pretending to read stood up smoothly, finally dropping his casual act. His partner did the same, both moving with practiced efficiency toward row 11. "Sir," the first marshal said quietly, showing his badge, "we need you to come with us." Other passengers watched in stunned silence as the man slowly nodded, his shoulders slumping in what looked like relief. When he finally loosened his grip on the bag, his hands were shaking so badly that the second marshal had to help him unbuckle his seatbelt. "Is everything okay?" the young honeymooning couple whispered to Minji as she passed their row. She gave them a reassuring smile. "Everything's under control. Just a passenger who needed some extra help." Her calm demeanor helped keep the cabin atmosphere from turning fearful. 2 local police officers boarded the plane, speaking quietly with the air marshals. As they helped the man stand, something fell from his pocket. A crumpled photo of a young woman in a hospital bed. The kind grandmother picked it up and handed it to one of the officers, her eyes full of understanding rather than judgment. The man in the blue shirt walked down the aisle between the officers, his different colored socks shuffling along the carpet. As he passed Priya's row, he looked so sad that she hugged Spots extra tight. She didn't understand everything that was happening, but she could tell this wasn't a happy ending for the nervous man. After he was escorted off the plane, the lead officer returned to speak with the flight crew. Soon after, Captain Patel's voice came over the speakers one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, the situation has been resolved safely. We'll be continuing our journey to Chicago shortly after refueling. Thank you for your patience and understanding." Relief flooded through the cabin. Passengers began sharing theories in hushed voices about what had happened. The grandmother who had offered tissues earlier wiped away a tear, murmuring something about hoping the man would get the help he needed. Minji walked past Priya's seat, pausing to adjust the little girl's tray table. You did a very brave thing today, she whispered with a warm smile. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is speak up when something doesn't feel right. Priya looked up at her with wide eyes, suddenly understanding that her purple crayon note had made a real difference. She hugged Spots close and whispered in his ear, "We helped someone today, even if it made them a little sad first." As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the runway, Flight 2847 prepared to continue its journey. The passengers would never know the full story of the man in the blue shirt, but they had all been part of something important. A moment when a child's simple act of caring had led to exactly the help someone needed. 2 days after the eventful flight, Priya sat at her grandmother's kitchen table, helping to roll small balls of coconut laddu while telling her story for what felt like the 100th time. The sweet aroma of cardamom filled the cozy kitchen as her grandmother listened intently. And then the police officers helped him off the plane, Priya explained, her hands covered in coconut powder. He looked so sad, Grandma. Do you think he's okay now? Her big brown eyes showed genuine concern, even for someone who had caused such worry. The doorbell rang, interrupting their cooking session. Ritu answered it to find a delivery person holding a large package with the Southwest Airlines logo. Special delivery for Miss Priya, he announced with a smile. Priya rushed to the door, leaving tiny coconut footprints across the floor. Her grandmother followed, wiping her hands on her flowered apron, curious about what could be in such a big box. With her mother's help, Priya carefully opened the package. On top was a beautiful letter written on official Southwest Airlines stationery. Ritu read it aloud as Priya bounced excitedly beside her. Dear Priya, your careful observation and courage on Flight 2847 helped us take care of someone who really needed help. We discovered the man was carrying important medicine for his sick sister, but he had become overwhelmed with worry and wasn't thinking clearly. Thanks to your note, we were able to get him the support he needed and make sure his sister received her medicine safely. Being brave doesn't always mean doing something big. Sometimes it's the small acts of kindness that make the biggest difference. You showed us that even our youngest passengers can be heroes. Priya's eyes grew wide as she pulled out the contents of the box. There was a junior flight attendant pin, gleaming silver in the afternoon light. Underneath lay a soft, plush pilot bear wearing a real Southwest Airlines uniform, complete with tiny gold wings on its chest. But the most special item was a framed certificate of appreciation, signed by the entire flight crew, including Minji and Captain Paddle. At the bottom was a handwritten note from Minji. Remember, brave hearts come in all sizes. Thank you for helping us keep the skies friendly. That evening, as local news vans gathered outside their house, Priya sat in her favorite reading corner, showing her new pilot bear to Spots. See, now you have a flying friend, she told her faithful giraffe. And guess what? The man's sister got her medicine, so even though he was scared, everything turned out okay. The story spread quickly through their community. Priya's school principal asked her to speak at an assembly about the importance of speaking up when something doesn't feel right. She stood on stage, clutching Spots for courage, and told her story to hundreds of fellow students. Letters started arriving from other children around the country who had heard her story. Many wrote about times they noticed something wrong, but were too scared to say anything. Priya's mother helped her respond to each one, always including the same message. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means doing the right thing even when you are scared. A month later, Minji sent Priya a photo that made her whole family smile. It showed the man from the flight, now looking much calmer and healthier, standing beside his recovering sister in the hospital. They both held thank you signs, and his socks matched this time. That night, as Priya got ready for bed, she arranged her growing collection of stuffed animals, Spots the giraffe, the pilot bear, and a new addition, a small blue airplane plush that a thankful passenger had sent her. Her mother tucked her in and asked, "What did you learn from all of this, sweetheart. Priya thought for a moment, hugging her beloved animals close. I learned that helping people is like dropping a tiny pebble in a big pond. You never know how far the ripples will go. And sometimes the smallest ripples can make the biggest waves of kindness. As she drifted off to sleep, Priya smiled, knowing that somewhere out there, other children might be finding their own courage to speak up when something doesn't feel right. After all, heroes come in all sizes, sometimes even 7-year-old ones with purple crayons and stuffed giraffes.